Hi guys, today I'm going to review The Search for Aveline by Stephanie Rabig and Angie B. I received this book through Netgalley in exchange for an honest review, so this is what you're gonna get. The Search for Aveline is the first book in a series. I don't know how many books they're gonna be. Could be duology, could be trilogy, could be anything more than that. I just know it is the first book in a series. It is an adult historical fantasy, I want to say. It does take place in our world, but there are lots of like mythical and fantastical creatures like mermaids and sirens. So it does have these fantastical elements, but it takes place in our world. And also, while this is kind of the overlying genre, it is definitely super heavy on the romance. I wouldn't necessarily call it a romance book. I don't think that fits, but it is definitely a very heavy theme in this book. Also, this book features a bunch of queer characters, which obviously I loved and definitely was one of the things that hooked me about this book. There's bisexual characters, there's homosexual characters, there's asexual characters, and I thought for all of the things that I personally know, that characters were well represented. I don't really want to say much of what the story is about because the Goodreads description and also the description on Netgalley that I first discovered is super vague, and all it tells us is that we are following a pretty amazing badass female pirate crew in this book. Honestly, I feel like if you're not intrigued when hearing that, I don't know what else to tell you. The thing is, it does not feature as much adventure and action as you might hope. It is very character driven, but still, if you're looking for female pirate crew with great diversity, I still think this is a book you should definitely check out. Overall, I found this book so enjoyable and would definitely recommend it. I think it was really great. As I said, very character driven. Once I kind of got into that and understood that it was a lot about all of these different characters, I really felt like I could appreciate them all a lot. There wasn't one single character that I didn't feel interested in or that, you know, I didn't like. There were just so many different interesting characters with so many different interesting backgrounds. It was just really cool to read about. I really feel like this is a series that can go in such a great direction, and I definitely want to check out the sequels because I think this has so much potential. My problem with this book mostly was that I felt like it was a little bit all over the place. It kind of missed a little bit of structure, and I just felt confused where we are, who we are with for a lot of the book. But I do want to get into some things that I really enjoyed in particular about this book before I get into like 2-3 things that I didn't enjoy as much. As I said, there are lots of different sexual orientations in this book, and what I really liked was that while the society as a whole is definitely very heteronormative and also kind of homophobic in places, the kind of crew that we are surrounded with, basically the whole book, is so accepting and just doesn't really care. Anybody can love or just not love whoever they want to love, and that was just really amazing. I felt like the kind of heteronormative aspects of the society were in a way historically accurate. Then again, mermaids and sirens are not historically accurate, so but I didn't ever feel like any of the characters were not accepted in this kind of environment that we saw them in most of the time. So I definitely liked that quite a lot, and I just think that the way the story dealt with all of these different sexualities overall was well done. As I said, we have a lot of different characters. There are not only women on this ship, there's also a few men. A few join the crew throughout the story, but most of the crew is female crew, and that was just really great, and it was so much fun to see them interact with each other and to see the relationships between all of them. As I said, it is a very character driven story, so a lot of the stuff we actually see in this novel are flashbacks. So we kind of find out what kind of happened in some people's pasts, how they came to be part of this crew, how they maybe developed a relationship with other characters, be it romantic or platonic. And while I definitely enjoyed that aspect, there were just so many characters And every single one of these characters got their own kind of flashback story, and it was just too much. There were points where I just couldn't follow. There were too many names. I didn't know whose story belonged to whom at some point. I was just like, well, who are we even talking about? Are we in present time? Are we in a kind of flashback right now? It was just a little bit confusing because I felt like before we even got to know all of these characters, we already got these flashbacks thrown at us. And I was just so confused. Sometimes chapters even started with like, she always had a thing for hamsters. I don't know. And I was just like, who always had a thing for hamsters? Tell me a name so at least I kind of know what the hell is going on and maybe remember the name afterwards. With even for the chapters where it did start with a name, sometimes I couldn't remember who the story belonged to. But still, there were even chapters where we didn't know who we were like talking about right now, and that just drove me insane because, as I said, all of these characters were interesting and really fun to read about, but at some point I just lost track. I think this could have been avoided easily by just spreading these flashback stories out a little bit more and by even putting a few of these stories into the sequel. I feel like some of the background stories that we got in this book were interesting but didn't really connect to the general plot of this book. They easily could have been in the sequel. It would have been more than enough. Now I feel like if you go into the sequel, you will just be confronted with like a million characters and you will have forgotten about every single one of them. And that just kind of sucks. As I said, this book is also pretty heavy on the romance, and while I am a sucker for romance, I just felt like because there were so many different characters, it just wasn't ever fully fleshed out. There were a few pairings that were kind of based on physical attraction or pairings that have been together for a really long time or known each other for a really long time, so I didn't ever feel like the feelings for each other weren't justified. It was just that I couldn't really develop a lot of feelings towards any of these pairings because there were just too many. At the top of my head, I can think of 6 pairings in this whole book. I just felt like it was a little bit too much. It was almost like this pirate crew was on a dating cruise because it seemed like everyone would have to get a partner in any way, be it just in a physical way. Someone made out with someone else. And I was just a little bit like, why? Do we really need all of these different stories instead of focusing on like 1, 2, maybe 3 pairings? I just didn't really see the point in putting so many pairings in it at once. I feel like there would have been a lot more potential to have a bit more slow burning romances. That said, there are a few explicit scenes in it, but I do have to say, for an adult book that is focused on romance for a lot of the book, I felt they were pretty tame compared to some other things I have read. But just be aware, there are several descriptions of sex scenes, but I felt like they weren't like super explicit, but just kind of explicit. And as I said, my biggest problem with it overall was just the structure, and I guess I kind of talked about it with like too many characters and stuff, but I just really feel like this was the biggest problem. I felt like sometimes we switched between present time and flashbacks and it wasn't clear enough. It wasn't ever clear where we were, with which character we were right now, and I just felt like there wasn't enough distinction between all of these different points of views and times even. This is kind of all that I have to say about The Search for Aveline by Stephanie Rabig and Angie B. As I said, overall I found this book really enjoyable. I just felt like there wasn't enough distinction between different points of views, and I just felt like this book could have been a lot better if there was more structure in it, if maybe we got like just like a time, if before every chapter there was also written like 1800 something. That would kind of just give us like a really rough timestamp so we kind of know where we were at, and maybe even like the character name written in the chapter header as well, so that especially if we had a flashback, we kind of knew, oh, this is a flashback for the character Catherine. I think this would have been things that easily could have made this book a 4-star read for me. As it is, I'm giving it 3 stars. I found it enjoyable. I just felt like too many things were supposed to be in this book and they didn't have place in this book. It was too character driven, and I love character driven, but if there are like 20 different characters and all of them are supposed to be in the spotlight, I just don't think that that works for a book that has like 100,000 words. If you've read The Search for Aveline, definitely let me know in the comments, or if you want to maybe check it out right now after I've did my review. And thank you so much for watching. I guess I'll see you soon. Bye!